Next, I'd like to speak with you about what it's like to grow up with autism. My parents never knew they raised a special needs child. They didn't know that until I was 37 years old. Now, my brother also shows traits of Asperger syndrome, so technically they may have raised two. And today, parents can have their children identified and get support not only for the child, but for themselves. Because it's a very hard task to raise a special needs child. I did not show that much abnormality in the very beginning because I showed exceptionality. As I mentioned in the prior video, I was speaking in complete sentences at 13 months. I was reading and writing very early. And I basically shone academically. I really shined. So the biggest problems that were seen were social. And I remember going into first grade and faces being just a blur, and my anxiety level being at a fever pitch. And at lunchtime, not knowing how to approach anyone to see who wanted to eat lunch with me. So I went to the teacher and I said, how do I find a place to eat lunch? And so she sat me somewhere. And then day after day I would ask her, how can I get along with people? How can I make friends? How do I do this? And she would make suggestions that would never work. So eventually I gave up and I would go to the swing set and I would swing all through my recess and all through my break. And I thought I would die when one day the teacher said that people were hogging the swings and that we had to have timed swinging time. Because after that, then I would sit up off by myself and just pray for the break to be over. So then I would go home and I had a tree swing. And it is true that people with autism like to swing. We do that to regulate our nervous system because our nervous system isn't balanced. And things like jumping on a trampoline or swinging in a swing gives us balance for a while. It gives us a sense of equilibrium. So I did quite a lot of that growing up. And I'll also mention how difficult it was for me to dress in the morning in the first grade, second grade, putting the shoes on the wrong feet, buttoning the buttons in the wrong order or so that they were uneven and things like that, and just taking a long time to get ready for school, which used to really frustrate my parents because they would say, "You're a smart girl, what's wrong with you?" But I couldn't do some very basic things, and I was clumsy and awkward. I couldn't kick a ball at school. I couldn't do anything in PE, so I gave up and tried to get out of activities, and I begged to be sent to the library instead of being in PE because my motor coordination skills are very impaired. Even today, I've been to occupational therapy and found out that I was diagnosed with a balance problem and a coordination problem, so I'm officially uncoordinated. But this really affects you when you're a kid and you're expected to do physical activities and you can't. And so growing up with having Asperger syndrome is a very lonely experience because you want friends so badly and you feel so alone. And you also want reassurance because you're in a very confusing world where you're being bombarded by and overloaded by sensory stimuli and your emotional stimuli. And you're trying to learn at the same time while the social world is a mystery. So we definitely need help, and I grew up without it because the disorder wasn't identified until 1994 in the DSM-4-TR. Prior to that time, it was just a theory by Hans Asperger from 1944. And so since the diagnosis didn't exist, I couldn't get help. And I would act like I was sick to get out of class. I would break down in tears in the middle of class. People thought I had emotional problems when really it was just normal for someone with Asperger syndrome to react the way that I did. And as I got to middle school, there was all this pressure to look a certain way and dress a certain way. And during lunch, all the kids wanted to talk about, well, the girls wanted to talk about their clothes, their hair, their makeup, and the boys. And I was still playing with dolls. And it was way over my head. And it was very frustrating and made me feel very alienated. And people with Asperger's develop more slowly. It's not that we don't develop at all. But the basic formula is that we're about 1/3 to 2/3 of our chronological age, depending on our level of severity. My Asperger syndrome is moderate, and so I would probably be I could be at half my age. I might be like someone in her early 20s. That's my estimate. That's how I feel most of the time. I don't feel 40. And when you're growing up and you go through something like puberty and your body starts to change when you have the emotional and emotional capacity of someone who's a much younger child. It's very grueling to go through. And high school was no easier, and I just kept to myself. I ate lunch by myself. I adjusted. And I found out when I was a school teacher that there were teachers that actually use a punishment called silent lunch, where a child has to sit by themselves during lunch and they can't interact socially. And I thought to myself, wait a minute, I've had silent lunch all my life. I didn't know it was a punishment. And it was something that I was simply used to. And when I did make friends in college, I was only 16 when I started, and the friends that I made were still in high school, and they were 14 and 15, and one was a mentally retarded girl. So it was very, very hard to make friends growing up. And I remember needing a lot of reassurance because I got lost in the school buildings constantly. My nonverbal learning disability got me very lost because we have trouble with directions, understanding left and right, visual memory problems. And so I had to be tracked down a lot. And when I went to summer camp, the kids called me, the camp counselors and kids were calling me Houdini because I would disappear so often and they couldn't find me. And some of it was that I couldn't find where the activity was going on, and some of it was that I was scared and I would run off. And so I really avoided social situations quite a lot as a child and young adult. And difficulty with executive functioning, which is planning and organizing, made it very hard for me to prioritize my school assignments and get things done. I was called slap happy in my work habits because I was a daydreamer. All through my report cards it says daydreaming, staring out the window, difficulty focusing. So this is my basic summary of what it's like to grow up with Asperger syndrome. And it wasn't really fun. I did enjoy my time to myself with my special projects, swinging on my swing, and reading and writing and creating artwork and reading. I read book after book after book. So I feel like my childhood experience was rich, but it was a lot different from someone who's born a neurotypical. We don't understand the invisible rules of social interaction. There's some sort of code that other people know that we don't know. And it completely escapes us, and they intuitively know it, and it's not programmed into our brains. So we make all kinds of social faux pas and not even recognize what we've done. And that's the story of my life, and I'm glad to be an adult because it's easier to live as an adult with Asperger syndrome than it is to be a child. Thank you.